Well, as I was telling you at the top, that the FW De Klerk Foundation has now issued a statement apologizing for those comments made last week, denying that apartheid was a crime against humanity. But not everyone is accepting the apology as expected. Let's talk about this now. I'm joined in studio by Nomboniso Gasa, researcher and analyst on gender and cultural issues, as well as political analyst Khaya Sithole. My thanks to you both. Good evening. Thank you for coming in. So I'm going to start with you, Nomboniso. So here we sit on this Monday evening, an apology finally from the FW De Klerk Foundation, the EFF rejecting it. Has the foundation gone far enough in that statement?
Well, I mean, I don't know what we really, it depends what we expect and, you know, different people expect. Personally, I saw the apology. I didn't particularly feel that it was genuine. I feel that the apology, like the statement that they released before, is misleading. I think that FW De Klerk is very dishonest in terms of his understanding of whether apartheid was a crime against humanity. I think that the assertion that he didn't know, I think it's very hollow. And I think what we see is an FW De Klerk who has always been ambivalent about the responsibility that, that he should take for the crimes during apartheid. You also see an FW De Klerk who has not transcended beyond his narrow role as a former president in apartheid era, in the sense that if you look at with whom does the statement resonate, it resonates particularly with the rise of the right wing in South Africa and the tendency to minimize and to try and run away from this issue. And I think that it's unfortunate that he is unable to transcend. I think it's unfortunate that he uses his platform for such a narrow agenda. And I think, however, it is important that we have these outbursts from time to time so that we can have a reality check in South Africa. And the reality check is that we don't share the same opinion about what actually apartheid was about. I think it was very revealing of FW De Klerk's humanity and lack of compassion and understanding when he emphasized the number of people who were killed. So he's caught in a time warp, in the time warp of the Cold War era, and I think this has been very, very clumsy. And I think anybody who's serious about where we stand today will see the statement to be what it is, a half-hearted effort to try and cover an embarrassment. I don't think he's particularly sorry. I just think he's embarrassed.
And I want to talk about that with you, Khaya, because in the statement, when you go further down, the FW De Klerk Foundation speaks about how it's still deeply committed to national reconciliation and values, including those of non-racialism. Yeah. How believable is that from a foundation that, of course, takes its lead from a former apartheid president, because that's who FW De Klerk was, and went as far as denying a statement on apartheid as a crime against humanity, as Nomboniso was saying, choosing instead in the rebuttal to cite black-on-black violence as if even that was not engineered by the government of the time.
Look, I think the difficulty here is that if you read the original statement issued by the FW De Klerk Foundation, they were very adamant that there was no such thing as apartheid being a crime against humanity. They cited this being a Soviet influence. So these were people that were very clear in the position that they espoused them. And what I saw today is the type of thing that you always see when somebody says, I apologize if I offended you. So of course the onus is upon you to keep proving that you offended. So therefore that's the basis for my apology. So it's not a unilateral undertaking. It's not an evolution of the mind that has happened in De Klerk's mind or even in the foundation's mind over the past few days, for example, where they've said, let us revisit what this was all about, and then say, actually, we ourselves are saying that this was indeed a crime against humanity. It's now become a PR exercise to say, well, if the rest of the country is saying that it was, and there's this point of departure, so therefore let us simply concede on that point and then move on. But I do not believe that there's been that unilateral undertaking or even that evolution of the mind to appreciate what the horror of apartheid is. And there's also obviously this new problem that we always stories find where suddenly Hitler, for example, becomes a hero of white people because they're saying, well, Hitler killed more people, so therefore we've decided that's the benchmark for what a crime against humanity is, and because you can only attribute 5,000 deaths or 23,000 deaths to this particular government, therefore you cannot apply the same logic. And I think it's important for us to have these conversations. A lot of people have been saying it shouldn't have been said, but I'm more happy with knowing what de Klerk really thinks rather than for forcing him to simply say it in the privacy of his own home when people like him are all over and they surround us, and there are people that we work with and people that we engage with. And I think us knowing exactly where people stand is far more beneficial than simply pretending that we live in this utopia that we envisaged in 1994, which quite simply has never materialized.
And Nomboniso, the EFF being one of the first organizations to reject this apology, they say that if true reconciliation is to be achieved in South Africa, those who perpetuated crimes against black people should face the law. Is that the ultimate remedy?
Well, you know, look, I don't want to prescribe what should be done. For me, what is important are the issues that are coming up with at this particular juncture in South Africa. In 1991, December 20th, 1991, when Mandela was very angry with de Klerk, he said something that was very interesting in his speech. He said, no wonder that at that particular moment, no wonder in his party, that is in the National Party, the Conservatives are making inroads. Now you understand why. And in that, what Mandela was saying was that, look, Mr. de Klerk, instead of you being able to transcend and indeed acting in a way that shows that you embrace the legacy of apartheid and trying to take responsibility for the violence, you are doing this thing of you're not quite sure where you stand. And I think at the moment it is also for me very interesting that the FW De Klerk Foundation, which had a lot to say during the Al-Bashir incident in South Africa, and people are quoting the Rome Statute, that the FW De Klerk today comes and says basically they didn't know about the Rome Statute. So you can see that there's no...
How believable is that?
So you can see that there's no serious conversation, but that's not even the point. The point for me is that if a former President de Klerk is serious when he says he's deeply committed to establishment of non-racial society, here's the thing: there are people who are considered to be part of his constituency of origin. The right-wing people who are sowing divisions in South Africa, the people who are talking about Afrikaner genocide. De Klerk comments about everything in this country, from corruption to a whole range of things. But these are the issues that he never talks about.
There's no voice.
Because we have not heard him. We have not heard him coming out and talking about this distortion in South Africa. So I'm saying, if he's truly committed in using his platform to, as he claims, to facilitate and to build a non-racial society that many of us believe in, then he should start in his own constituency. He should start and talk to people who look up to him as a beacon of hope, as a leader, and address those people. And until he does that, until he addresses apartheid apologia from people who consider him as a leader, we can't really have a serious conversation.
And Khaya, just on the point that Nomboniso makes, you look at some of the reaction. If you go under any article or statement issued on this matter, you see the old National Party supporters who are emboldened by this.
Absolutely.
I was reading comments just under some of the YouTube interviews posted today where people are saying, oh, there you go, using derogatory words, the K word, to say the K words now have no other excuse. Why don't they just move on? So has the former apartheid president, because that's what I choose to call him, accounted for how these past few days have now fueled and emboldened racists in South Africa?
No, he hasn't, and I think that's what I was trying to say earlier on, in that perhaps it is at moments like this where we get to see perhaps the plurality of opinion, or perhaps the opinions that still exist between what I think the National Party used to call the verkramtes, because they were between the verkramtes and the verrichters. So of course there were the people within the National Party itself who never really bought into this particular idea. And what you then saw is that in this transition we simply said we're undergoing a journey of reconciliation, but I think the missing leg of that particular journey was really the question of the justice component of it. So a lot of people, the sense of anxiety and the sense of frustration simply is based on the fact that justice wasn't seen to be done. And of course, the people that would have been, subjected to the form of justice are now emboldened to say, well, clearly this wasn't a problem. And if it was a problem, well, what are you going to do about it? So I think that sort of inability to be compassionate with people that are part of society and that were victims of apartheid is something that we really need to deal with. So, I mean, for example, you would think a couple of weeks ago, in fact, I asked the question of who is the CEO of the FW De Klerk Foundation, randomly asked the question. Now, of course, the previous CEO was Tiens Elof. Now, this person, a person who rose to a top position in the academy in South Africa, and you're thinking in a post-apartheid university, you've got a leader of a university who clearly associates with these particular ideas. What does it say about the state of conversations, the state of discussions in elevated spaces like the academy? So, of course, in society itself, there are going to be people like this. They exist. The question is, do we want to then pretend that they don't exist and simply saying, apologize and move on and paper crack of the fact that we are not this utopia that we had in mind when 1994 happened? Or do we actually want to then say, let us talk, let us have some form of actual reconciliation?
Nomboniso, I know you wanted to jump in there.
However, I want to be very clear that I personally agree with the choices that we made in the 90s. I agree with the approach that we took. Instead of having a Nuremberg-type trial, that we had a reconciliation, a truth and reconciliation process. And of course, the underlying principle there was that for people who did not take responsibility, then there had to be a justice process that had to follow. So I think that it's for me, it's very, very important to look back into that period. And that's why I like looking at what Mandela said at that time, because these issues have always been debated and they've always been very, very heated. And even FW De Klerk, if we look at his participation in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, if you look at, for example, just at the level of the posture of their presentation, and you look at the posture of the ANC, for example, there was an incredibly marked difference between the two. And I think that this is what we are seeing. We are seeing that there's this tendency to try and say things weren't that bad, so it's not new. But I don't believe, for me, I don't believe that we've come to a point where we have to unravel everything. I think the question, therefore, that we would have to ask is, have we arrived at a time when we need to look at national legislation that would in fact say, listen, these are the parameters of free speech. You couldn't be in Germany, for example, and be a Hitler apologist, right? But also it's important to also look at the fact that there is a rising of anti-Semitism all over the world. So I think we need to balance these kinds of things. I'm not, personally, I am not convinced about an argument that says there have to be trials.
Okay.
But I think if we are going to have that, let's have a conversation about what exactly we're trying to achieve.
Let me toss it to you then, Khaya, because people will say it's precisely because the TRC process wasn't harsh enough on racists and those who committed atrocities during the apartheid years that you've got a racist part of the population so emboldened that even in 2020 they are unrepentant. So should we have had a Nuremberg-style process?
Look, I think the reality here, as Nomboniso said, that the approach that was taken at the day simply said, look, for those that obviously do not come out clean, then there ought to be a justice-related process. And I think if you look at the number of cases that the TRC said obviously needed to be taken over by other agencies, it is the ANC government that has opted not to do that. So the big question here is, having then put this platform and said to people, this is what we think is the most appropriate forum at that point in time, well, I think we should be able to look back and say, well, perhaps this is not what was appropriate for a country that we're trying to build here, because that was supposed to be part of a bigger social compact and a bigger social consensus where even the white right-wingers would have been made aware that actually the reason we've set this out is that we don't want to cast you out and replay Nuremberg 1945, but rather we've decided that as a country this is the best way to move forward. And perhaps the way people went through the TRC journey is very fragmented and very different, and for a lot of people it's simply because the justice part of it just hasn't been seen to be done.
Well, over time, so I want us to move along quite quickly. And Nomboniso, I want to throw this question to you, two questions in fact. The moves to now try and have FW De Klerk stripped of the Nobel Peace Prize and the ANC's handling of what's happened over the past few days. How do you read those?
Look, I think that the ANC has a lot of homework for itself. I think that there is no reason why they couldn't affirm FW De Klerk's role as the former president, deputy president in the government of national unity, and come out very clearly on the spot in Parliament, and disagree with him on apartheid, on his statement about apartheid against crime against humanity. So I think that the ANC, and now, they are issuing a statement. It's too little too late. So it's very interesting for me. It's not only about what the ANC has said or hasn't said. It's also about its instincts. Its political instinct is very problematic. You have the spokesperson of the ANC coming out, Zizi Kodwa, and saying, well, De Klerk is going nowhere.
Not even an official spokesperson.
That's an incredibly arrogant statement. De Klerk is going nowhere. We actually don't care about you taking this opportunity to flex and to show us that you're in control. We're interested in a reasoned argument. So I think there's a lot that's going on with the ANC. I think they really need to revisit how they approach these things, especially the arrogance that the party has as the party of liberation, and therefore they don't have to explain anything. So I think they've lost an incredibly important opportunity, especially in terms of saying De Klerk was a former vice president, and this is his role in government of national unity, but we disagree on this. So that's the...
And on the Nobel Prize? Doesn't matter whether he keeps the title.
The petty side of me. And I can be very petty. The shady, really shady side of me would like him not to have the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
But the serious side of me... actually, De Klerk has worked himself into an irrelevance historically. I mean, if you think about people that this society looks up to, people that you can say are a conscience of the society, De Klerk doesn't come to mind. So he's already put himself in oblivion as far as I'm concerned, and he's not helping me. So on that one, I really don't care.
And Khaya, I want to come to you then about the point Nomboniso was making about how Zizi Kodwa from the ANC came out Thursday night and made those comments. Is it the job of the ANC as a former liberation movement, is it their job, their role, to forgive any person on behalf of a nation?
I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, the ANC is a political party, and this political party, having been so involved in the entire liberation process, would instinctively always say that actually De Klerk, in spite of everything that we forged way back in 1994 with the Government of National Unity, these are no-go areas. These are the type of areas that alienate our core constituency. These are the no-go areas that offend even this idea of reconciliation that we agreed to in the Government of National Unity. So therefore, these are no-go areas. It doesn't matter to me the fact that this was put together on the table by the EFF, so therefore your primary instinct is to simply say no because the EFF said it. It indicates a level of political immaturity that you wouldn't associate with a liberation movement that's 100 years or 8 years old. So for me, that was the first problem. But I think also on the question of the Nobel Peace Prize, I'm worried about how South Africans see that as a particular benchmark for validating something. For me, that Nobel Prize has gone to Yitzhak Rabin, it's gone to Yasser Arafat, it's gone to Barack Obama. All those people in my world aren't really parameters or paragons of what you call, good leadership. So I think for us to then say the Nobel Peace Prize must concur with us, no. We as South Africans have a particular position and we reject it. I don't really care what the Nobel Prize has done about it or what they're going to do about it, because next year they're going to give it to some other despot. Do we care? We don't. It's just a trinket as far as I'm concerned. And the fact that Mandela really went all out to accept it with him, again, that was Mandela's own decision making. If Mandela could have been told that, oh, by the way, 2 days after you do this, De Klerk is going to deny that this was a crime against humanity, perhaps the view would have been different. But for the Nobel Peace Prize we brought into this, who cares about that trinket?
But I do
20 seconds,
but
out of time.
Yeah, but I do think that at the time when De Klerk and Mandela received the Nobel Prize, I think that the Nobel Prize is not only a statement of what you are, but I think also it's a statement of encouraging a particular process. Yeah. And I think at that time it was that. And as I say, for me, it's neither here nor there, but the shady part of me would like
it must disappear.
All right, Nomboniso Gasa, Khaya Sithole, thank you so much to you both. That was Nomboniso Gasa, researcher and analyst on gender and cultural issues, and Khaya Sithole, political analyst, joining me tonight to talk about all the developments around the former apartheid president, FW De Klerk.